Why don't you try the diner across the street? You don't look like you belong in a place like this." Jessica Reed didn't whisper it. She flung it across the polished marble host stand like an insult dipped in vinegar, her tone sharp and smirking. And in that moment, she had no idea that the woman she was humiliating, standing quietly in jeans and a white t-shirt, holding the hand of a young boy in a swim team hoodie, was the CEO of the very restaurant she worked in. Now, before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. If you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter how they look or dress, this story will hit home. Subscribe for real stories that reveal truth and inspire change. And if you're tired of people being judged for not fitting in, hit that like button. What happens next? You won't forget. The time was exactly 5:58 p.m., and the early summer sunlight stretched low through the tall windows of the brand-new Manhattan branch of Savor Bistro. Casting long gold beams across the polished floors, Nia Thompson, 40, stood at the entrance with her 12-year-old son, Ethan, his hand still damp from the chlorine of a championship swim meet where he'd just won his first gold medal. This wasn't just dinner. It was a moment, a celebration, a promise kept. And she had chosen this place, her place, for a reason. A corner VIP table had been reserved in her name, under a soft light, with a view of the open kitchen she'd personally designed 2 years earlier. But Jessica Reed, standing at the host stand in a crisp black blouse and an attitude that screamed judgment, didn't care to check the system. She gave Nia a quick once-over, eyes narrowing, then rolled them toward her co-worker Kyle Bennett. "VIP table?" Jessica repeated, incredulous. "For you?" Kyle chuckled, stepping in beside her. "Yeah, I think the diner next door might be more your style. This section's for premium guests." Nia looked at them calmly, trying not to flinch in front of Ethan. "I have a reservation under Thompson. VIP table 2. Her voice was clear, measured, polite. Ethan looked up at her, confused but still smiling. Jessica let out a slow, mocking exhale. "Reservation's not showing," she said, eyes still locked on Nia's outfit, not the computer screen. "Must have been a mix-up, or maybe you just thought you made one." "Mom, is everything okay?" Ethan asked in a small voice. Nia crouched slightly, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just having a little delay." But it wasn't just a delay. It was a dismissal. Kyle leaned over to David Holt, the gray-haired manager lingering by the wine station, and muttered something. David didn't bother coming over. He simply raised a brow and said, "Handle it," then turned back to his clipboard. Ethan fidgeted beside her. "They don't look happy we're here," he whispered. Nia took a breath and pulled out her phone. "Lauren," she said when her assistant picked up. "They're refusing to seat us. It's beyond rude. Ethan's here. He just won gold. I'm not about to let this be how the evening goes." Lauren's voice crackled on speaker. "Stay put. I'll get Robert. Give me 2 minutes." Just then, a man from a nearby table, Michael Chen, a regular patron and respected food blogger, stood up. "Hey!" he called out toward the front, his voice carrying over the soft jazz playing through the ceiling speakers. "I saw them reserve that table. You're in the wrong here." Jessica ignored him. She looked to Kyle. "Get James," she said. A moment later, James Carter, the security guard on shift, approached in a stiff gray uniform. "We've got a disruption?" he asked, already placing one hand on his walkie-talkie. "They're not on the list," Jessica declared, her voice rising now. "And they're making a scene." Nia turned to James calmly. "No one's making a scene. My name is Nia Thompson. I have a reservation. Table 2. James didn't check. He didn't ask. He just motioned toward the door. "Let's step outside and talk." "No," Michael interrupted, moving closer. "They have every right to be here. This is insane. It's fine, Jessica snapped. We'll get them out. Ethan's face dropped. Are we getting kicked out? Mom? He asked, tugging gently on her sleeve. We're staying right here, Nia said firmly. No one's removing us. She tapped her phone again. Lauren, they've called security. Robert's on his way, Lauren said urgently. Do not move. Jessica crossed her arms. Reservation or not, you clearly can't afford this table. Nia turned, slowly and deliberately. Excuse me? We've got high standards here, Kyle added, barely hiding his smirk. You know, people who belong. Nia's gaze darkened. Ethan, she said quietly, remember this moment. This is what disrespect looks like. The boy nodded solemnly. I don't like it here anymore, he said. You will, she replied, eyes not leaving Jessica's. Soon, Jessica tapped at her iPad and shook her head. No reservation showing, she repeated with finality. You're just wasting everyone's time. Kyle muttered something under his breath. Priya Sharma, a new server shadowing Jessica for her first week, glanced up nervously from behind the counter. Kyle, she whispered, you didn't even check the name properly. Kyle shrugged. Doesn't matter. Look at them. You think VIP? Priya looked over at Nia and Ethan, then back to her tablet, clearly uncomfortable. Nia caught her eyes but said nothing. James shifted his weight. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And I'm going to have to ask you to back up, Michael said, stepping protectively in front of Nia and Ethan. You're humiliating a mother and her son, in public, and you don't even have the facts. Please, Ethan whispered. Can we go? Nia knelt down to his level. No, baby. We're not the ones who did anything wrong, and we're not going anywhere until this is made right. She stood and faced the front desk again. You've got 60 seconds, she said clearly, before this becomes something much bigger than any of you can imagine. The staff didn't move. Jessica rolled her eyes. Kyle looked confused. James hesitated. Michael stood firm. Priya shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip. And Nia. Nia stood tall, back straight, one hand gently resting on Ethan's shoulder, the other holding a phone already ringing through to Lauren again. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the kitchen, a plate shattered. But in the dining room, the temperature had already dropped several degrees, because no one, not even the seasoned staff, could shake the feeling that something was coming, something they didn't see, something they should have. Jessica's arms stayed crossed like she was guarding a palace gate, and Kyle leaned in close to her, muttering something with a smug smile as if they were sharing a private joke. The arrogance in their stance wasn't just offensive, it was exhausting. Nia could feel the warmth of Ethan's small hand in hers, but she also felt the sting of something deeper, the kind of dismissal she hadn't experienced in years, not since the days when investors told her, your background doesn't inspire confidence. While sipping cappuccinos in boardrooms she'd worked twice as hard to enter. But tonight wasn't about her past. Tonight was about her son, his win, and the promise of a celebration that was being slowly dismantled by people who didn't even bother to ask her name. I'm not going to say it again, James Carter said, his voice low, almost rehearsed. You can leave peacefully, or I'll have to call someone in. This is peaceful, Nia replied, not raising her voice. And I'm not going anywhere, just then. Ethan looked up at her, voice barely above a whisper. Can we just go? Mom, we can eat somewhere else. The words hit Nia harder than she expected, not because she didn't understand the instinct to run, but because she remembered it too well. At his age, she'd watched her mother leave restaurants without dessert just to avoid scenes like this. Not tonight, sweetheart, she said gently. Not after what you just accomplished. Ethan gave a small nod, not quite understanding, but trusting her all the same. Nearby. Priya Sharma had stopped pretending to organize menus and was now watching everything unfold. Her eyes flicked nervously toward Kyle, who was now speaking louder. "This has gone on long enough," he said, puffing up his chest. "They're wasting our time, distracting guests. David said to remove them." "David hasn't even walked over here," Michael Chen shot back. Standing between Kyle and the table now. "You're taking orders from a man hiding in the wine nook?" Kyle's face flushed, and for the first time, he seemed unsure, but before he could respond, Jessica doubled down. "You're not the only ones here. You know." She snapped at Nia and Ethan. "Some people actually paid for their seats tonight." Nia blinked, calm but visibly offended. "And what do you think I'm doing here?" she asked. "You think I'm waiting for charity?" Jessica scoffed. "I think you're making a scene because you want attention. I think you've made enough assumptions for one night." Michael cut in. "You're making fools of yourselves, and the room knows it." Indeed, heads were turning. A couple near the bar paused mid-toast. A young woman by the window pulled out her phone but didn't hit record, just stared, troubled, and then, with quiet resolve, Priya finally stepped forward. "I heard him," she said suddenly. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I heard Kyle say, 'They don't look like VIPs. That's why he didn't bother checking.'" The restaurant went still. Jessica turned sharply toward her. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Telling the truth." Priya answered, "It's my first week, but I know this isn't right." Kyle threw his hands up. "So now we're the bad guys? Because we enforce standards?" "You're enforcing stereotypes," Michael countered. "Big difference." David Holt finally emerged from the back, face tight and impatient. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Scanning the scene, Jessica jumped in. "They're creating a disruption. They're refusing to leave. We tried to handle it." Nia stepped forward, her tone even but piercing. "You mean you tried to humiliate me? You ignored my reservation, dismissed me in front of my son, and now your team is openly admitting they judged me by how I look." David sighed, clearly annoyed but not surprised. "Look, let's all take a breath. Maybe there was a misunderstanding." "No one misunderstood anything," Michael said. "Your staff made it crystal clear what they think about people who don't look VIP." Ethan clutched his medal and looked up at his mom. "Mom, are they allowed to treat us like this?" Nia knelt beside him again. "No, baby. But that's why we stand our ground. So they learn they can't keep doing it to anyone else." Priya shifted, clearly nervous but resolute. "Kyle said it more than once," she said, glancing at David. "And Jessica was never going to check the system. She made up her mind the second they walked in." David looked between them and offered the most corporate thing he could muster. "Let's not overreact." "Oh, I think we're just getting started," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Lauren Pierce, in a sharp gray blazer and phone still in hand, stepped into the room like a gust of cold air. She didn't raise her voice, but the way she carried herself turned heads. "Robert's on his way," she said calmly. "And I'd suggest you all prepare yourselves." Jessica squinted at her. "And who are you?" "Her assistant," Lauren said, gesturing to Nia, "and someone who knows exactly how many policies you violated tonight." David frowned. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Do I look like I'm laughing?" Lauren replied. The silence that followed was thick. Kyle fidgeted. Jessica's eyes narrowed, and James looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "We don't want trouble," David muttered. "But you welcomed it," Michael responded. "The moment you decided someone wasn't worthy of sitting in your restaurant?" Ethan, eyes wide, said softly, "Mom, are you really important?" Nia smiled gently. "What matters is that you are, and no one should treat you like you're less than that." Lauren stepped closer, Robert will explain everything when he gets here. In the meantime, maybe someone should finally check that reservation under Thompson." No one moved. Jessica looked paralyzed. Kyle pretended to scroll the tablet but tapped the wrong buttons. David stared at the host stand like it might solve the problem for him. Finally, Priya leaned forward and tapped 3 keys. The screen lit up. "VIP Table 2, she read aloud. "Reservation confirmed. Nia Thompson, party of 2. Ethan beamed. "Told you," he whispered proudly. But Nia didn't smile. Not yet. She looked at each of them, Jessica, Kyle, David, and James, one by one, and said quietly, "Every second you've spent trying to erase our place here, it's going to cost you." And though her tone was even, the promise inside it was unmistakable. Something was about to change, not just for them, but for the entire room. Michael's eyes narrowed as Priya read the reservation confirmation aloud, her voice trembling slightly but clear. "It's right there," she said again, tapping the screen for emphasis. "VIP Table 2, Nia Thompson, reserved at 3:17 p.m. The silence that followed was almost loud. Jessica's expression shifted from smug disbelief to a stunned flatness. Kyle stepped back slightly as if trying to disappear into the wall. And James, the security guard, adjusted the walkie on his belt like he was waiting for instructions no one was giving. But it wasn't over. Nia could feel it. Something still wasn't sitting right. And just as she was about to speak, Michael leaned over the host stand, eyes scanning the screen more closely. "Wait a minute," he muttered. "What's this line here? Cancelled at 5:32 p.m.? Priya looked again. "That wasn't there earlier," she said, her voice now edged with concern. "It wasn't marked as cancelled when I checked 5 minutes ago." Michael turned toward Jessica slowly, voice calm but pointed. "Did you cancel their reservation?" Jessica blinked. "Excuse me?" "Don't play dumb." Michael snapped. "That cancellation line wasn't here until just now. Someone altered the system. You said they weren't in it. But you didn't say they had been. Did you?" Nia's stomach clenched, not out of shock, but from a cold, familiar anger. "You tried to erase us," she said, staring straight at Jessica. "You didn't just deny my reservation. You deleted it, then claimed it never existed." Jessica's voice cracked. "That's ridiculous. Why would I do that?" "Because you didn't like the way we looked when we walked through the door," Nia replied. "Because you assumed jeans and a t-shirt meant we didn't belong." Ethan tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, they tried to make it like we were never here?" "They did, baby," she said, never taking her eyes off Jessica. "But the truth always finds its way back." Kyle stepped in again, hands up. "Let's not jump to conclusions. This whole thing's gotten way out of hand." Michael turned on him. "You said, and I quote, 'They don't look VIP.' Priya heard you. I heard you. And now you want to backpedal because you're exposed." "I never said that," Kyle snapped. Suddenly panicked, Priya stood her ground. "Yes, you did. Twice." Jessica looked to David, hoping for backup, but he was already dialing someone on his phone. "I'm not taking the fall for this," she hissed. "You already did," Lauren said, stepping up beside Nia. "Every word that's come out of your mouth tonight has been documented, witnessed, and now verified by your own system." James, still hovering awkwardly, finally spoke. "Look, this is above my pay grade. I was told there was a disruption, and I acted accordingly." "You acted without verifying anything," Michael said. "You nearly escorted a mother and her son out of a restaurant they had every right to be in." "Because someone lied," Priya added, "and tampered with company records." Nia looked around at the dining room. More patrons were standing now. Some had stopped eating entirely. Others were simply watching, eyes wide, ears sharp. A woman near the corner booth whispered, Is she really the CEO? And another murmured, This is unreal. Nia took a deep breath. Ethan, come stand beside me. Her son moved quickly, proudly. We're not going anywhere, she said, her voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. But some of you might be. Jessica's voice cracked under the pressure. You're threatening me now? I don't need to threaten you. Nia replied. Your actions have spoken louder than anything I could say. Ethan leaned in and whispered. I think people are on our side. Mom. They are, she whispered back. Because this isn't just about us. Michael placed both hands on the host stand. You tried to humiliate a child who just wanted to celebrate something special. You tried to humiliate a woman whose only mistake was believing this place was better than it is. Lauren tapped her phone again. Robert is 2 blocks away. I suggest you all prepare your statements, especially you. Jessica, this is a misunderstanding, David muttered, clearly rattled. A misunderstanding, Nia repeated, is when you get someone's drink order wrong. This was deliberate. You all saw who we were and made a choice to erase us. And now you're going to face the consequences. Jessica threw her arms up. You're not even dressed like someone who runs a place like this. Ethan spoke up, his voice loud, clear, and full of fire. She owns the whole company. A few people gasped. Others looked at each other, stunned. Nia didn't speak. She just looked at Jessica. And in that silence, the weight of every word, every decision, every insult came crashing down on the staff who'd dismissed her. Mom, Ethan whispered, are they going to get fired? Nia looked down at him and gave a small nod. They're about to learn what happens when you try to erase people who built the very floor you're standing on. Suddenly, James took a few steps back, clearly distancing himself. Kyle looked like he wanted to vanish. David rubbed his forehead, and Jessica just stood frozen, pale and shaking. Priya, still behind the counter, seemed caught between relief and fear. You were brave, Nia said to her quietly. Thank you. I couldn't let it keep happening. Priya said, Not again. Lauren's phone lit up. Robert's downstairs, she said calmly. He's coming up now. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted again. It was no longer about damage control. It was about accountability. Jessica backed away from the host stand. You don't have to ruin my life, she pleaded. I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake, Michael replied. You made a series of choices rooted in bias and disrespect. Kyle opened his mouth to defend her, but Michael held up a hand. Don't. Then, finally, Nia turned to Ethan. You see, baby, sometimes grown-ups do the wrong thing, not because they don't know better, but because they think no one will hold them accountable. But you are, Ethan said softly. That's right, she nodded. And I always will. As the elevator chimed in the distance and footsteps echoed up the marble stairwell, the room tensed like a held breath. Robert Evans was on his way up, and everyone who had laughed, dismissed, or looked the other way was now bracing for what came next. But Jessica wasn't done fighting. Backed into a corner and red-faced, she tried to regain control with a voice that cracked under pressure. I did what I was taught, she snapped, looking around for support that wasn't there. We were told to focus on the right image for the brand, to protect the premium dining experience. That's what corporate expects, she pointed. Not at Nia, not at Ethan, but toward the entire room. You all want to act shocked, but this is how it works. You just don't say it out loud. The gasps weren't loud, but they were sharp. Even David took a step back, as if the air had turned heavier around him. Michael Chen narrowed his eyes. Are you saying this kind of discrimination is part of your training? Jessica hesitated. That flicker, just a second too long, gave Priya the courage she needed. She stepped forward again, her hands trembling slightly as she said, "Actually, she's not lying. During onboarding, they told us to prioritize people who looked upscale." She glanced nervously at the other staff. "We weren't told to say it, but it was implied in everything they showed us. Photos of perfect couples, mostly white, in designer clothes. They called it brand visual alignment." She swallowed hard. They never once showed a family that looked like hers. The weight of that revelation sank into the room like a stone dropped in water. Nia didn't flinch. She'd suspected something more systemic from the start, but hearing it confirmed, out loud, and from someone inside, brought a fresh, deeper kind of anger. Ethan looked up at her, confusion clouding his face. They taught them to be mean. They taught them to make assumptions. Nia said softly, "That's worse." Lauren stepped in, her voice controlled but direct. "This isn't just about 4 employees anymore. If this training is real, it's coming from the top. And if it's been happening here, it's happening in other branches too." David suddenly looked panicked. "This is ridiculous. That part of training was just a guideline. It wasn't policy." "It was enough to humiliate a CEO in front of her son," Michael snapped. "Enough to almost get her thrown out of her own restaurant." Jessica looked like she might cry. But Nia didn't offer comfort. She simply looked at Ethan. "This is what we fight," she told him. "Not just the people who act on bias, but the systems that encourage it." "Mom," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "How many times has this happened to other people?" "Too many to count," she answered. "And most don't get the chance to fight back like we do tonight." Just then, the door opened, and Robert Evans stepped into the dining room, tall, composed, and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. His eyes scanned the room quickly, taking in the tension, the frightened staff, the stunned patrons, and finally, Nia and Ethan. He didn't say anything for a beat. He just nodded to Lauren and walked directly to Nia. "Ms. Thompson," he said, clear and respectful. "I am deeply sorry." Nia nodded once. "We have a problem. Robert. A serious one." Robert looked toward Jessica. "I assume these are the individuals responsible for the incident?" "Yes," Nia replied, "but it's bigger than them." She turned toward Priya, giving her a small nod of encouragement. "Tell him what you told us." Priya cleared her throat. "During my first week of training, I was told to prioritize guests who looked premium. They used coded language, but it was clear what they meant. I didn't think it was okay, but I didn't know how to push back. Until tonight," Nia said. "You spoke up, and that matters." Robert's expression darkened as he listened. "That's not just poor judgment. That's institutionalized bias." David jumped in. "You can't pin this all on us. The corporate onboarding materials come from HQ. We've been using those slides for over a year." Robert raised a brow. "And you never thought to question them? To report the messaging?" David looked away. "It was just how things were done." Jessica, trying to salvage what little credibility she had left, blurted out, "We were protecting the brand. That's what they told us. To maintain the look and feel of luxury. We didn't mean any harm." "Didn't mean harm?" Nia repeated, her voice sharper now. "You mocked me. You tried to erase me from your system. You told my son we didn't belong." She stepped forward slowly. "And you did it in the very space I built. The irony is almost funny." Michael spoke up again. "The real harm is to every person who didn't have the voice, the title, or the backup to stand up to this." The room nodded, even some of the staff in the back. Silent until now, shifted uncomfortably, the implication settling in. Robert took a slow breath and looked to Lauren. "Document everything. Names, statements, times. We'll start a full audit in the morning. He turned back to Nia. This ends now. Ethan looked up, hopeful. Does that mean they won't get to do this to anyone else? That's exactly what it means, Nia said, finally placing a hand on her son's shoulder. Tonight is the last time this happens under my roof. Jessica took one last shot. So we're just done? That's it? You're going to ruin our careers over one bad night? Nia looked at her, unblinking. You didn't lose your job over one night. You lost it the moment you decided my son and I weren't worth dignity. And now, we're done here. The room remained silent. No applause, no cheers. Just the heavy quiet that follows the moment justice begins to rise. The weight of the room settled on Robert Evans as he stepped fully into the center of the dining floor, his polished shoes clicking softly on the marble tile. He looked at Jessica, Kyle, David, and James, then at Nia and Ethan, and shook his head slowly, as if disappointed but not surprised. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Everyone, please listen, Robert said, calm but firm, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a gavel. This is Nia Thompson. She's not only a customer, she is the Chief Executive Officer of Savor Dining Group. A full silence fell over the restaurant. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations halted. Even the soft jazz from the overhead speakers seemed to mute itself in recognition of the moment. Nia didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She just stood tall, her arm gently wrapped around Ethan's shoulder. So, she said evenly, looking straight at the staff who had humiliated her. Are you still so sure I don't belong? Jessica's mouth dropped open, her eyes darting from Nia to Robert as if she were trying to see if this was some elaborate prank. You're kidding, she said breathlessly. You're the CEO? The very one you said should go to a cheap diner, Nia replied, voice flat. The same one whose reservation you erased. The same woman you tried to kick out of her own establishment with a 12-year-old boy at her side. Ethan looked up at her, then turned toward Jessica. You were really mean to us, he said softly. And you didn't even ask her name. Jessica stumbled backward, her words coming out in fragments. I didn't know. You were just in jeans. I thought you were... You thought I wasn't worth a second glance, Nia said, finishing the sentence for her. You decided what I could afford, what I deserved, based on how I looked. You judged my son on sight, and now you want grace? Kyle tried to speak next, his voice cracking. We were just following what the training emphasized. We didn't mean it personally. It was always personal, Nia said, because it wasn't about policies. It was about perception, and you chose to believe that perception was more powerful than truth. David shifted uneasily, trying to sound measured. Surely there's a way to handle this internally without damaging reputations. The damage, Robert interrupted coldly, was done the moment you stood behind that counter and refused to intervene. When you watched your staff insult a woman you work for without saying a word, you knew who she was, David, and you let this happen. A loud silence followed. Jessica, still reeling, glanced toward the other staff as if hoping for someone, anyone, to defend her, but no one stepped forward. No one could. Lauren turned to Nia. Susan Caldwell and Richard Ellison are both on the line, she said, holding up her phone. They're watching everything from the boardroom. They say it's your call. Nia. Nia didn't hesitate. Jessica Reed, Kyle Bennett, David Holt, and James Carter are to be terminated effective immediately. Jessica gasped. You're firing us? I'm holding you accountable, Nia said calmly. You don't get to insult families and still collect a paycheck with my company's name on it. I didn't mean to, Jessica began, but her voice trailed off as the gravity hit her. You mocked my appearance, Nia continued. You laughed at the way I dressed, the way I walked in, The fact that I brought my son. Do you know what he said to me while you were trying to erase us? He asked me if we were allowed to be here." Her voice trembled slightly, just once, before regaining its steady tone. "No child should ever feel that small in a place their mother built." Jessica broke then. She covered her face with one hand and let out a shaky breath. "Fine," she muttered. "You want to know the truth? We laughed about you in the back. We said you looked like you were lost. Kyle called you a stray. I said you were probably in the wrong building." The confession came out bitter and defensive, like she wanted credit for being honest now that the ship was already sinking. But it only made things worse. "And that," Nia said softly, "is why you're walking out of here tonight unemployed." Kyle tried to interject, but Michael held up a hand. "You've said enough," he said. "We've all heard who you really are." Robert turned to James, who had stayed oddly silent through most of the ordeal. "And you?" "I was doing my job," James said weakly. "I was told there was a problem. I didn't know who she was." "You didn't ask," Nia replied. "You didn't check. You didn't question whether something might be wrong about what you were being told. That's not called doing your job. That's called being complicit." James looked down at the floor, knowing there was nothing left to say. Lauren handed a tablet to Robert, who quickly began drafting the termination entries. "The board will follow up with formal paperwork tomorrow," Robert said. "But as of now, you're relieved of duty." Michael leaned over and whispered to Ethan, "Your mom just did what most people only dream about." Ethan smiled wide, eyes bright with a mix of pride and awe. "She always does." Priya stepped up next, standing beside Nia with hesitation in her voice. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." Nia turned toward her and gave a nod of genuine respect. "You did the right thing when it mattered. That takes guts. And it's people like you who will help me rebuild this place the right way." Robert nodded. "We'll be reviewing every piece of onboarding material. There'll be no more of this appearance over character nonsense." "And the training?" Nia asked. "Overhauled," Robert promised. "Starting with immediate bias retraining across all branches." Ethan tugged gently on his mother's sleeve. "So, can we still celebrate?" Nia smiled. "Now we can." Michael laughed under his breath. "You want me to get the chef? He owes you something better than appetizers." Laughter began to return to the room, not because the problem was small, but because the right person had stood up at the right time. Nia turned to Ethan. "Tonight wasn't what we expected, but you learned something more important than any medal." Ethan tilted his head. "What's that?" "That when someone tries to shrink you," she said, "you don't back away. You rise taller. You speak truth. And you make sure they never do it again to someone else." The boy nodded. "I want to be like you." "You already are," she whispered, wrapping her arm around him as the restaurant finally began to feel like her place again. The next morning, under the muted hush of a polished boardroom atop Savor Dining Group's Manhattan headquarters, the air held a different kind of weight, not of conflict, but consequence. Sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows as Nia sat at the head of a long walnut table, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Ethan sat quietly in a tailored navy blazer, his gold medal tucked under his collar, but his eyes alert. Across the table sat Susan Caldwell and Richard Ellison, two long-serving board members who had reviewed the incident footage, read the eyewitness accounts, and now waited for Nia's call to action. "Let's begin," Nia said calmly, her voice firm but not raised. "As of 10 a.m., Jessica Reed, Kyle Bennett, David Holt, and James Carter have been formally terminated, with cause. Their conduct violated not only our company's ethical standards, but the basic dignity we owe every guest, regardless of background, clothing, or color." Susan nodded. The board supports your decision fully. Nia, their behavior was indefensible, Richard added. And frankly, long overdue for scrutiny. We've all seen the warnings. But this was undeniable. Nia gave a single nod. The problem, however, wasn't isolated to 4 people. What we heard last night suggests a systemic flaw, a pattern of biased training and unchecked assumptions. That means we don't just cut out the rot, we fix the soil. She gestured to Lauren, seated at her left. Effective immediately. We're launching a full audit of all onboarding and customer engagement materials across every Savor Bistro location. Every manager will be retrained, every policy reworded for clarity, and every single staff member will go through mandatory bias training. This company's reputation isn't built on marble or menu items. It's built on how people are treated when no one's watching. And when someone is watching, Ethan added, his voice soft but sincere. They shouldn't be ashamed of what they see. The room paused for a second, and Susan smiled gently. Spoken like a young man raised by a leader. But just as the meeting seemed to turn toward resolution, Lauren cleared her throat. There's something else, she said, placing a manila folder on the table. While clearing out David Holt's office, our compliance team found this. She slid the folder across to Nia, who opened it slowly. Inside, printed in bold black ink on company letterhead, was a memo titled Guest Perception and Image Reinforcement Guidelines. The first line was damning. Staff are encouraged to prioritize seating and service for individuals who present a polished, premium appearance reflective of Savor's upscale branding. Discretion advised in execution. Nia's eyes scanned further. Bullet points followed. Defer premium service to well-dressed guests. Avoid confrontation with non-matching clientele. Redirect questionable reservations to general seating or off-peak hours. She looked up, her expression flat. This was distributed? Lauren nodded. It was emailed to all managerial staff 12 months ago. We traced it back to a directive from David Holt's office. Richard leaned forward, visibly disturbed. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen, and a PR disaster, Susan added. This goes beyond implicit bias. This is codified discrimination. In writing. Nia closed the folder slowly and pushed it forward. Then we make it public. No redacting. No spinning. We own this. We fix it. And we let every person who's ever been turned away know we've changed. Ethan tilted his head. Won't that make people angry? Maybe, Nia replied. But anger fades. Accountability lasts, Lauren added. We've also begun reaching out to former guests who filed prior complaints, many of which were ignored or dismissed under David's management. We're issuing formal apologies and offering them private invitations to experience the reformed dining environment. Good, Nia said, standing slowly. Because a brand isn't worth its name if it only welcomes the people it's comfortable with. She looked out the window. Her reflection mirrored faintly against the Manhattan skyline. This company was built to serve people, all people. And now, we begin again. Ethan stood beside her, slipping his hand into hers. Can I help too? He asked. You already are, she whispered back. As the board adjourned and the first draft of reform policies rolled to printers across all Savor locations, a different kind of tone settled into the building. It wasn't just correction. It was transformation. The old way had cracked, and something new, something fair and real, was breaking through. 3 months later, on a crisp September morning. The Manhattan skyline shimmered beneath a clear sky as Nia Thompson stood at the front of the Savor Dining Group headquarters boardroom, not as someone reacting to a crisis, but as a woman who had turned that crisis into a catalyst. The long mahogany table was now surrounded by new faces, diverse, thoughtful, and empowered, many of whom had been hired during the post-incident reform push. Ethan sat in a front-row chair beside Lauren, his gold medal tucked into his blazer pocket, his eyes beaming with quiet pride. Behind them, a monitor displayed the new Savor Policy Initiative. Hospitality with integrity. Nia took a breath, glanced at the agenda, and set her notes aside. She didn't need a script to speak from the heart. "We've spent the last 90 days rewriting more than just training manuals," she said, her voice steady. "We've redefined what it means to walk into a place and feel like you belong, not because of how you look or what you're wearing, but because you're human. That's the standard now. Not VIP looking, not brand matching, just basic decency." She paused and nodded toward Susan Caldwell and Richard Ellison, seated beside her. "And with board support, these policies are now permanent. Every location, every employee, every guest." Applause rippled around the room, but it wasn't the loud, self-congratulatory kind. It was steady, warm, like something genuine had taken root. Lauren smiled and whispered something to Ethan, who nodded. When the room settled, Susan stood to add her voice. "We've reviewed over 50 archived guest complaints from the past 2 years. Many were dismissed. Some were never even logged. We can't undo that damage, but we can acknowledge it, and we can ensure it never happens again." Just as she finished, the door opened quietly, and a woman stepped in. Mid-30s, plain gray skirt suit, hair tied back. She looked nervous but determined. Lauren rose to greet her. "This is Jamie Lynn," she said, introducing her to the board. "She's a former assistant manager from our Philadelphia location." Jamie stepped forward and cleared her throat. "I wasn't sure I had the courage to come," she began, her hands fidgeting slightly. "But when I heard about what happened in New York, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Nia nodded gently. "Take your time." "A year ago," Jamie continued, "I submitted a formal complaint to my regional manager after witnessing a hostess refuse service to a black couple during a quiet dinner hour. She told me she assumed they couldn't afford the chef's menu. I documented the incident, filed the report, and waited." She swallowed hard. "I never heard back. Weeks went by, then months. Eventually, I was told to let it go if I wanted to keep my position." The room fell silent again, not out of shock, but confirmation. Nia's expression didn't change, but her voice grew heavier with truth. "How many more of you are out there?" she asked quietly. "How many people were silenced, just for doing the right thing?" Jamie nodded. "That's why I came. Not to point fingers, but to finally be heard." Lauren placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are—" Richard turned to Nia. "We'll launch a full internal whistleblower review, retroactive, anonymous if needed." "Do it," Nia said without hesitation. "And I want every location head to read her statement, aloud, at staff orientation." Jamie smiled, small but genuine. "Thank you." From the corner of the room, Ethan raised his hand. "Can I say something?" All eyes turned to him, and Nia gave a small nod. "Go ahead, baby." The 12-year-old stood up, hands tucked in his pockets, voice a little shaky but strong. "My mom didn't just fix a restaurant. She showed me what it means to stand up, even when it's hard, even when people are mean or unfair. I used to think grown-ups always knew what was right, but now I know. They need reminders, too." He paused, then smiled. "And sometimes, those reminders come from their kids." The room chuckled softly, but many wiped their eyes behind quiet smiles. Nia stood beside him and placed a hand on his back. "This wasn't just a policy change," she said to the group. "It was a culture change, a values change, and it's only the beginning." 3 weeks later, Ethan stood on stage at a local youth event, delivering a short speech about fairness and courage. While Nia watched from the front row, His final words mirrored hers from that unforgettable night. When someone tries to shrink you, don't run, stand taller. And in that moment, as applause filled the room, Nia didn't just see her son, she saw the future she'd helped shape. One policy, one voice, and one act of courage at a time.